Welcome, everyone. My name is Michal Baranowski. I'm a director of the Warsaw office of the German Marshall Fund. And it's fantastic to be here with Jamie Fly, senior fellow at GMF, currently in Berlin, but our transatlantic voice. Jamie, great to be with you over Zoom, Skype. We wanted to talk today about transition, something that was presidential transition, something that has been in the news a lot because it's not been the most usual transition. President Trump took a bit of time to allow for the transition to begin. We are now in the process. So we wanted to go into a little bit details and a better understanding what transitions are like, should be like, what's happening right now in the behind closed doors in these rooms. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience, where you're coming from, and then we can dive into some of the things that are happening, should be happening. Over to you.
Sure. In my primary experience with transitions is basically two different transitions. The first was in 2008 when I was a director at the National Security Council, working under President George W. Bush. And so I experienced firsthand how an outgoing administration in a normal world prepares to hand over responsibility to an incoming administration. In that case, it was the Barack Obama administration. And then a number of years later in 2012, I served on another transition, on the transition of Governor Romney, who was a Republican presidential candidate who ran against President Obama. And that transition obviously was a transition team that never really needed to actually implement, but did a lot of planning in the months prior to the election in November 2012.
Okay, that's great. So you are really an insider on both ends. So that's cool to see this. So let's talk about what has changed now for Biden's team. For a while, they've been cut off. They could do internal planning, but they were not able to talk with the federal workers, and they didn't have access to resources. What's different right now? What can they do, and what do they need to do between now and January 20th?
So obviously the main difference this year has just been the delay in them being able to engage after the election with the outgoing officials. The Biden team, like the last several elections, like the Romney effort I was involved in 2012, had a number of staff who already were working in the months prior to the election, who had access to salaries, government salaries, who had access to government technical assistance, IT support, things like that. And they've already been able to do some planning, but obviously after they won, they wanted to expand the number of people involved in that effort. And they wanted to move quicker. They wanted to engage outgoing officials to talk about the issues that are going to be handed off to them. And now that the General Services Administration has given them the green light, they're able to set up those contacts, start to go into the federal agencies and work methodically through the kind of onslaught of topics that are going to face the new team that starts on January 20th.
And you mentioned your experience from an outgoing administration. What is the outgoing administration offering, and how does the process look from basically the outgoing Trump's administration?
Well, in the last several cycles, administrations have prioritized this transition. I think for the George W. Bush administration, in which I served, they also had a delayed transition when they took over from the outgoing Clinton team, and that was because of Bush v. Gore and the recount in Florida. And so I think people like Steve Hadley, who was National Security Advisor at the end of the Bush administration, felt strongly, having lived through that, having then lived through 9/11 and these national security crises, that there should be a professional transition. So actually work in the Bush administration started well before the election with those of us at the individual directorate level and the National Security Council staff starting to prepare written memos where we were documenting what we thought the Bush administration achieved over the last 8 years, and then also highlighting areas for potential action for the new administration. And so by the end of that process, on Inauguration Day, Steve Hadley was able to hand over to his replacement a whole book, essentially a briefing book of materials that presented the Bush administration's perspective on what the new team would be facing. And there were all kinds of briefings associated that with the most critical issues like Afghanistan at the time or Iraq. And so that's how a normal transition in recent cycles would have operated.
I'm just curious. I mean, there is a lot of debate right now and criticism of the delay. You mentioned that because of Bush v. Gore, George W. Bush's administration and transition was also delayed. To what extent are you worried about the current delay in terms of an impact, not political impact, but impact on the real world? U.S. is in the middle of a corona crisis, but there are also national security concerns. Are you worried about it, or do you think that they are able to make up for the lost time by January 20th?
I think at this point they can probably make up for lost time if they have a good working relationship with the outgoing Trump team. I mentioned that, like in the Bush case, that there were preparations months prior. There have been press reports that those preparations have also been underway, just very much below the radar, even prior to the most recent election. There's an individual named Chris Liddell at the White House who actually also served on the Romney transition. So he's been through this sort of planning process before. I believe he's been overseeing from the Trump side the transition. And if people like Chris Liddell, if Robert O'Brien, a national security advisor, are allowed by the president to make themselves available and their teams available to the incoming Biden team, I think they can make up for a lot of lost time. They can start with the security clearance investigations that are going to be required for officials who need to be in the White House on the first day or in the agencies on the first day. So they have lost some time. But I think they can make that up pretty quickly now, assuming that they can develop a strong day-to-day working relationship.
Well, that's interesting. You said if they are allowed by the president. I mean, the president has not been necessarily the most forthcoming. So do you foresee? I mean, is it possible that there will be further trouble in the transition? I thought that you Americans are out of the woods. But do you think there can be some further trouble in how smoothly the transition is going?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, I think the big question, and the president doesn't need to be involved in every single aspect of the transition, but there will be sensitive policy issues that the outgoing team may know that they're going to have disagreements with the new team on. There may be certain things that need the president's authorization. Can we brief the new team on this before January 20th? And, again, that's where the last several cycles, my sense is that there's been this, especially when it's one party handing off to the other, this bipartisan solidarity, where I think in the Bush case, you actually had some of those incoming officials invited in for maybe even some joint sort of simulations to kind of plan for potential national security challenges around the inauguration itself, just prepare for crises. And so there needs to be a certain amount of goodwill to do things like that and trust. And I do think that can be, it can happen quickly at the lower levels, but given the president's current demeanor, the more kind of forward-leaning aspects of that could be difficult if he refuses to work cooperatively with the incoming team.
Okay, well, let's switch the lens then. Let's go to the perspective of the incoming team, because they have been clearly preparing. Bring us to that part of the world. I mean, how many people are there? What are they doing? Are they ready? Do they have books of policies, ready to implement, or are they just beginning their process of thinking as they are getting more information? How does it work from Biden's administration team?
So this process begins months prior to the election. People actually come on staff at the transition In a normal pre-pandemic world, that would have been, moving into a federal office building, using federal office space, but with very limited access to the actual federal agencies. Obviously, not knowing whether your particular candidate's going to win, you can't march into the State Department and get your questions answered about a particular policy issue or personnel matter. So what it usually involves is people who have served in other administrations, and they're divided up into teams, focused on different agencies, and they have a dual mission of both identifying personnel to fill all of the political appointments, the several thousand political jobs across an administration.
How is it?
Sorry?
How many is it?
It would probably, I don't know the size of the Biden team, but even in the Romney transition, which obviously, again, was not needed after Election Day, there were several hundred people involved in this effort. Now, not all of them were full-time. You have a lot of people who also will help out, just as they do with policy advice on a campaign. They have day jobs. They'll help out on nights and weekends. But these individual teams looking at agencies like the State Department, like the Defense Department, like the intelligence community, they will start to map out, these are the key positions we need to fill. These are the priority areas for the first 100 days. These are quick wins where we can show that there's a change in policy, or we can build on a success of our predecessors. And the other thing, final thing they'll look at is, do we want to really change anything significantly related to the structure of our agency? Can we eliminate certain positions? Do we add a special czar in this area? And early in administration is when it's easiest to do those sorts of substantial changes, because all the political appointees will be replaced, and you can play around with the org chart of the agency more easily. And so a lot of those conversations are likely underway, and probably some of them already started before Election Day.
So, Jamie, I mean, US is sort of special and different in a way of how deep the transition, how deep the change is really. What are the numbers that we are talking about, and how much? Like, if we look at the area that we are probably the most interested in the State Department and Pentagon, how deep, maybe Homeland Security, but how deep the changes will be? How many people does the Biden team need to bring on? Where do they come from? What do they, what have they done until now? And perhaps also what happens with the folks that are moving out?
Yeah, in the US case, I believe I saw a number recently that there might be about 4,000 political appointees across an entire administration. So not just in the national security space, but that's a lot of jobs at many different levels. The other challenge you have in transitions is this planning, and these lists of personnel probably were developed months ago before anyone had any idea who the individual secretaries were going to be at the top of those agencies. So you then have secretaries who are now starting to be named, who might take those lists and look at them and want to throw them out or add their own people in. So it's a sizable process. And obviously a lot of those positions, some of them require Senate confirmation. Others, people can just be appointed as a political appointee and move in on January 20th. It's going to take a long time. Usually much of the first year is taken up until you have political appointees at most levels of an administration. And these will be people who come from think tanks, from the private sector, from academia. Some will have served in government before. Some will, come in fresh for the first time. People also come in from Capitol Hill usually, depending again on the agency and the position. If they have experience doing oversight of these agencies, it might be very relevant to their work in the executive branch. And the people who came to serve President Trump will then move on and either leave Washington or move into similar jobs in the private sector or the think tank world. But the one thing I'll note that the Trump administration has struggled with is they've had a lot of vacancies throughout their tenure. And so honestly, a lot of the positions are now vacant or being filled by acting officials. And so that honestly makes it even more urgent that the incoming team fill some of those positions quickly.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk for a second. Let's speculate a little bit about policies that might be coming from the Biden's administration, but based on the initial personnel pick. So now we have initial set of secretaries. Then there are a couple more speculations on the way. Jamie, what are you seeing? What are you seeing, especially when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to security policy, not only based on the views that the president-elect has been communicating, but what can we tell looking at having Tony Blinken at state, Jake Sullivan, Tennessee, and others. So what are you seeing that we can sort of reading leaves of this initial appointments? What can we say about the upcoming Biden's administration?
So I think obviously it's a team of people thus far who know their way around the U.S. national security apparatus. Many of them served together in government in the Obama administration or in earlier Democratic administrations. So there's not a steep learning curve for most of them. A number of them have worked together on the campaign itself as part of Biden's inner circle. That's often the norm. The Trump model obviously disrupted that. I mean, President Trump's approach was to bring in kind of people, he liked to say out of central casting, who he felt kind of fit the bill, looked like a Secretary of Defense or looked like a Secretary of State, like Rex Tillerson, if you remember his first Secretary of State. And a lot of those people that Trump brought together didn't really have much experience working with each other. And so it's going to be a return to a very different approach where this team, they know each other, they know where the disagreements are, they know what they agree on. And so that will hopefully allow them to hit the ground running on these early issues. The final thing I'll just note is it's a very transatlanticist team. They have deep experience working with allies and partners, some of them living in Europe. And so I think obviously you combine that with the focus of the campaign, they're going to spend a lot of time on rebuilding American alliances, reassuring US partners, and then trying to kind of corral allies to deal with some of the new challenges, especially China.
Mm-hmm. So, a lot of people who are watching probably are interested, are foreigners and allies and partners, as you said, wanting to engage with the new administration. And of course, we all seen President-elect making phone calls to leaders. But when would you expect embassies and foreign officials to be able to engage with the incoming administration at a level below the president-elect? When can we get a sense of actual policies that are being developed? How does this work?
Yeah, I think the challenge for any foreign partners that want to engage with the incoming team is that it's going to require patience and it's just going to take time. This team in particular, after all of the debates in 2016 about foreign interference in America's election, about the conduct of the incoming Trump team during this transition period, this Biden team has been very cautious, as far as I understand, about avoiding engagements with foreign officials, even people who had personal relationships in the past with some of the Biden team members. I think were told, please, I can't talk to you until after the election, and now maybe until after inauguration. So I don't think they'll be doing, beyond the high-level phone calls between the president-elect and foreign leaders, a lot of personal interactions with foreign diplomats. And even after Inauguration Day, it's going to take time for them to fill the key positions at all the levels. It's going to take the Senate time, which has to process these nominations. The Senate usually will move relatively quickly on cabinet level nominations, sometimes even so quickly that they can confirm the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense in the first week or so of the new administration. But for a lot of the lower level jobs, we may go 6 months without people in those positions just because they need to be vetted. And the new secretary wants to perhaps take their time to figure out who they want by their side. And so during this period in the interim, there's not going to be a lot of officials who actually can speak authoritatively on behalf of the new administration. And so a lot of embassies and other partners may just have to turn to people in the Biden circle, at think tanks and people who volunteered their time on the campaign or on the transition, but haven't gone into the administration yet, to try to get a sense of what the early priorities are.
Yeah, thank you very much. So some patience warranted on behalf for us all looking from the outside in. Jamie, thank you very much for a fascinating conversation. Good luck to you as American people from the allies. I'm glad it's heading in the right direction of having everything in store and ready to go on January 20th. We all do need America functioning. So, but thank you very much for the conversation. It was really very interesting for me personally as well, and I'm sure for our viewers.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks.